Hello, my name is Jen Johnson. I'm the Director of Orientation, Transition, and Retention at American University, and we're thrilled to be kicking off our summer webinar series with you all today. In the chat box, you would have seen a note that we do have closed captions available, so you can follow the link there. We'll also be recording this session and posting it to our YouTube channel in 24 to 48 hours, and that will also have captions on it as well. So I'm going to get out of your way and turn things over to your presenters, Dr. Fanta and Karyn Cassella. Thank you, everyone.
Hello, everyone, and I know you're joining us from all around the country and the world. We're very excited to be able to spend the next hour with you. I'm Dr. Fanta, and I'm the Vice President for Campus Life and Inclusive Excellence here at American University. And I've been here, hard to believe, but it's going to be close to 30 years that I've been at the university working with students. And I will say it's been 30 wonderful years, years where I feel like I've learned and I've grown a lot. And the most fun part of my work is seeing students who come through our doors and seeing them graduate and continue to be in touch with them and in connection with them. So I feel like I often say to my team that I feel like I have the best job on campus because of the work that I'm engaged with. Here with me this afternoon is Karyn Cassella. Karyn is our Associate Director for Family and Parent Engagement. Karyn and I, what we actually have in common is that we're both products of American University, something we're very proud of. I've gotten all three of my degrees at American, and I will say this to you now, beware, once in, never out. Be sure, I can tell you that for a fact. I came in, like every one of your students will be coming in, really with a fire in the belly to come and to learn and to grow and to be that person who not only grows intellectually, but also personally and professionally. An American University became very quickly my home. It's been my professional home, it's been my intellectual home, and it's been very much my home on so many levels. And so it's been a wonderful place for me to be and to really be able to lead some efforts with an incredible team of colleagues. Our session today is really focused on the parent experience. We often talk about the student experience a lot, but as we've come to learn very quickly, you cannot talk about the student experience without talking about the experiences of family. The families in many ways are on this journey with us, and they're on this journey with their student. And so today our objectives is a simple one. We want to make sure that we talk about the transition and what this transition is going to look like and the growth opportunities for your students in this process. We also want to set the stage for the key offices that your student will be interacting with and that on many occasions you may find yourself interacting with. And then more than anything else, we want to talk about the community of care. I often say when I talk about what is it that we're trying to accomplish, really in essence what we're trying to accomplish is really to live out this ethos of the community of care. And talking about community of care, I would be remiss to start this session without acknowledging what's going on in our world and in our nation today. As I've been watching television, as I've been reading the news, I think every single one of us today really does need to pause and to ask ourselves the question of what is happening within our nation and what does that mean for all of us, knowing what's happened and the protests that are happening around the country. And as I've been in touch with many of my students who are in the Washington area, but in other places, I know that many of our students who are very focused on social justice have been out there and have been making their voices heard for what we know and is an important social justice issue. So I say this in earnest to say maybe in our times, for me, it was the apartheid movement and divestment. And now as I look at this generation of students, we see that these issues of racial injustice still very much are with us, and our students, our communities in many ways are really feeling the brunt of that. But what it also does for me is that I see among our students the beacon of hope. As I talk to many of our students, they're relentless in their pursuit of believing that change is possible and that change must happen and that they have to lead the change that we all want to see. And so I have to say that that is what gives me hope. And as I think about what's happening in our nation and as I talk with our students. So this piece of community of care is a very important piece. And the community is not just the community at American, it is a community beyond our walls. We want to make sure that our students in coming to American get the full benefit of what is clearly an intellectual journey, but that journey has to translate into what type of human beings do we want to see in the world, and how do we all contributing in making sure that we are working with our students, we're working with our communities to get to a better world that we believe is very much needed. So wanted to start with that. it's always helpful for me to know who's actually in the room. And in this sense, it's helpful for me to get a sense of who's actually with us today. I know that there's close to 370 of you that are on this line, but I don't have enough about a sense of who are all the folks and what's your your lived journey. But the one question that I did have and wanted to do a poll immediately is, I would like to know how many in this session are sending their first student to college. How many of you are kind of parents sending your first student to college? If we can maybe do a very quick poll so that we have a sense of who those folks are. How many first student to college? And we just launched the poll, so it'll just take a few for us to gauge and see. And you have the poll in front of you. If you can fill it out for us, that would be helpful. Okay.
Fanta, we've heard from about 89% of our participants.
Okay, great. And what are the results? What do we know?
90%. Okay. So for 67% of you, this is the first student that you're sending to college. Congratulations.
Wow.
25% of you, this is not your first. This is your second. We've got about 6% sending us their third student, and 2% have sent more than 3 to college.
Wow. Well, first of all, let me start by saying, to have 67%, to almost literally two-thirds, to have over two-thirds of our participants that are sending their first student to college is an experience in of itself. And if you were on campus, what you would actually notice is that I would have had a box of tissues that would be next to me, because I know, and I often would say to those parents, would have to huddle and would have to kind of have would have to have an additional session, because that's a lot of transition all at once. It's not only that you're sending your student to college, but you're sending your first student to college, and that's an experience in of itself. But also, as you notice on the poll, there are 25% who are sending their second student. Those are going to be sort of what I call the families that you want to lean on. You want to lean on their experiences so that you know what they've learned along the way and how we can kind of share that experience. But even for those for whom this is your second that you're sending to college, I always say the experience is never the same. No two children are the same. No two experiences are the same. No two colleges are the same. So I think even for yes, sorry, we've been having problems with the mic. Even for those for whom this is maybe your second, no two students are the same, no two experiences are the same. So I hope that you two will get something out of the session. And so with that, we're going to jump right in. Let's talk a little bit about what you can expect and what this would look like. I often say that this is a journey, and there's not one right way of doing it, and there's not a wrong way of doing it. There are multiple paths to get to this journey, but what is important is to leverage the resources and to leverage the knowledge that's there so that we can work together to make sure that your students are as successful as they can during their time at American University. And so we're going to jump into a couple of things. When I usually do sessions with families, I like to talk to other families to kind of say, what have you learned along the way? Now that you've been on this journey with us, what are things that you would share with other families if you had an opportunity to speak to them? And so these are really some of the advice that we're getting from campus partners, from our families, from our students, and from several of our colleagues. The first is read what we send you. So many times I can't tell you that a student will contact us and said, I never got information on X. And we're like, are you sure that you never got information on X? Are you actually checking your emails? Because the official AU email is the email that will send any official notices to. And so often the student will say, I wasn't sure about that. So it's really important. We will communicate with you and we'll communicate with you throughout this process, but it's very important to make sure that what is being sent, that you actually are aware of what's being sent and that you're taking the time to read that information. We'll try to send you information in multiple forms, but this piece about read what we send you is going to be an important part of where we are. Second is, in addition to read what we send you, let's go to the second one. Embrace the growth opportunity. I can't say that enough, because a lot of times what we'll hear from families is there is this anxiety of, I'm sending my student far away. I'm not sure what community they're going into. I'm not sure how well they're going to be embraced in this community. There will be lots of growth opportunities. And I often say to students, embrace the fact that you're going to make mistakes along the way. You're not expected to have figured it all out. That's what college is about, is having the opportunity to figure things out, but knowing that you're not alone in figuring those things out. And so for families, you're going to hear me say this a lot, it is going to be a balance of how you support your students, but also how they get challenged. It's really a balance of support and challenge. Students who are supported without the challenge often will not grow to the extent and the potential that they have. But students who are given challenges only, but without the necessary support, when they stumble and are not sure where to go, they can lose their confidence. So this balance of challenge and support is going to be important. And this piece about embracing the growth opportunity is going to be a really important one. And there will be many, many growth opportunities. And we'll talk a little bit more about what some of those are from our experience with working with first-year students. And the next one, do your homework. Now, this is a mantra that students hear me say a lot, and they'll often laugh. They'll say, Dr. Av, I know, I'm supposed to have done my homework. And I'm like, yes. As a university, it goes without saying that this ability to do one homework is a really important one. Students will come to me with a million ideas about things that they want to do, or things that they think needs fixing, or things that they believe needs to be examined. And I always say to them, my door is open to you, and it's really important that your voice be heard, and it's important for all of us to be able to embrace that change. But then I always say next to them, how did you do your homework? Have you gone and talked to other people? Have you seen what the research indicate? So this piece about doing your homework becomes an important part of what we will want to think about and how we will want to work with you on. And part of doing your homework is knowing what the resources are, is knowing how to best access those resources in the time that those resources need to be accessed, so that together we can problem solve the issues that come our way. Next, please, Karyn. Assume goodwill. We live in a time where I think there's always this assumption that, well, things didn't happen because that person did not want what's good for me. Things didn't happen because the person really was malintentioned and so forth. And this piece about the need for goodwill in the society that we're in now is ever more present and ever more pressing. And so I always start from the premise of we need to assume goodwill of each other. We need to assume that for the families, when they contact us about a situation with their student, is that they really want to figure out how do we best support the student. By the same token, know that when we are having these difficult conversations that we sometimes will have to have with your students, assume that it is well-intentioned and that what we want is that student to be successful at American University. And sometimes in order to be successful, it means that there's some hard lessons to be learned along the way. It's this piece again of support and challenge. The assuming goodwill is an important piece. Karyn, next one, yeah. Remember, there are many sides to a story. It is important to hear all sides and suspend judgment. I'm going to repeat this one. Remember, there are many sides to a story. It's important to hear all sides and suspend judgment. So what do I mean by that? All too often we'll hear from a parent, my student said X, Y, and Z happened, and I am absolutely floored by X, Y, and Z. What is the university going to do about this? And what we often say to families is there are multiple sides to a story. Part of our work and part of our due diligence is to gather the facts. The second is to make sure that we're putting together the different pieces. The third part of our work is to make sure that when we're then providing advisement, we're providing advisement with the full picture in mind. So when you hear that first side of the story, yes, that is the lived experience and that is the perspective, but there are multiple perspectives, and it is all of our work to make sure that we're getting the fuller picture. Now, I will say there's one piece that if your student tells you, that may be the case, and they may say to you, I ran into this situation, and I had my conversation with maybe the advisor, I had my conversation with the community director, and the community director said that I need to do additional work in this area, and that they're not going to be able to just fix it right now? And the answer is yes. Or when students get into conflict with each other, which will happen, I can assure you, in college, the immediate thing is it is human nature to want to get as far away from that as possible. And what we will say to students is part of the importance of being in college or anywhere is about relationships and healthy relationships. So the ability to communicate effectively, the ability to problem solve, the ability to navigate difficult situations are going to be important. And we will be with the students along the journey. But what we will not do is to say, you know what, because this is so hard, you're going to be exempted from that. Part of growth is being able to confront the hardships that come. Part of growth is being able to struggle with the unknown. Part of growth is making sure that you are in many ways developing the skill sets and the knowledge base that can help you get to the other side. And so that's going to be an important part of that. Karyn, next one. So also, those are some of the advices that you have from partners, but we also ask students, if we had opportunities to speak to family members, what would you like for us to tell them? What's important for them to know about the student experience? And so here are a couple of things. Some of them will surprise you, many won't. Listen and give advice when asked is one of the things. A lot of times students will say to us, we're getting a lot of advice. We're getting advice from you all. We're getting advice from our families. We're getting advice from the faculty. We're getting advice from the upper class students, lots and lots of advice. And it's overwhelming. And would it be possible if we could only get advice when asked? And yes, I would say yes, there's something to be said about that, about the need for independence and more what I call interdependence. But what I will say is that there's sometimes it's actually okay for you to give advice even when they haven't asked, because you know your student and you know your student better than any of us. And so, for example, it's this piece of you may see that your student is really in many ways taking actions that will not be good for them, and in many ways would frankly not be healthy. That you as a family member are having this conversation with them, even when it's unsolicited, you actually would be doing us a favor, because it means that together we can preempt some of the things perhaps that may be really painful and that may not be necessary if we can do that. But by and large, I think giving them the room and the space to try out things, and in some cases to stumble, so that in order for them to learn and to develop their independence and confidence is going to be very important for us to do. Next one, yes? Don't believe everything you read on my social media accounts. I see this all the time. I'm always shocked and puzzled by how much self-disclosure happens in our society with social media, to the point that I'm often just, I'm just dumbfounded by the amount of self-disclosure. And we do tell students, be careful. Social media is a double-edged sword. It is that friend that you have that allows you to connect in so many wonderful ways, but it's also that source that you really need to be careful about some of what you put out there, either because you don't want to put things that can put you in danger, certainly, but also more importantly, you may not want to disclose things that can come back and really in many ways can bite you at a later time. We all know, and it goes without saying, that now employers and others, when they're hiring, sometimes will go and do a social media check and kind of get a sense of the character of the people that they're interacting with. And I often say to students, you need to be careful about how much you self-disclose on social media, because this idea that, I'm talking to the universe and there's really no one per se is something that I think students are all too comfortable with, and it becomes important. But also I will read, sometimes I'll get an email or a call from a parent saying, I read my student's social media account and I know what they're up to and I'm having some issues with that. And our answer to you is going to be, that's a conversation that you need to have with your student. This is going to be part of their kind of adulthood. So it's going to be important for you to be in conversation with them about that. And then next one. Just because I don't call you back right away doesn't mean that something is wrong. Don't panic. This is a really important one because I can't tell you the number of times where families will say, you know what, I'm in conversation with my student 4 or 5 times a day. They text me and I know what's going on and I haven't heard from them. And then my immediate question is, well, how long has it been that you haven't heard from them? And then they'll say, well, it's been 2 hours. 2 hours, no, not time to panic. 5 hours, certainly not time to panic. 7 hours, probably not time to panic. It could be even longer. If we do our job right, your student should be in classes, your student should be in the library, your student should be socializing with their friends and developing healthy relationships with their friends. So they should have a pretty robust schedule. And so please, if you haven't heard from them, over a period of time, There is no need to panic. Of course, if you feel like there's something really unusual that's going on, by all means, please do contact us, and then we can figure out and track down what's going on. But I cannot tell you the number of times that we get these calls, and then we'll go and find the students, and we'll be like, your mom and dad have been calling, and they're very worried, call them. And then they'll be like, oh, but it's only been a few hours, and I've been studying, and I've been, spending, having lunch or dinner with my friends, etc. So the students are not having the same sense of urgency that you do as well. And so I do think it's important for you all to work out, what are your expectations of your students? How frequently are you going to be communicating? I think those are important things that you will want to have in terms of communication with your students, so that we don't have the panic button that comes on a routine basis, perhaps would be important. Next one. Oh, please don't disappear. Keep things from me. I can handle it. This is a big one. A lot of times, families will call us and they'll say, I need to speak to you, Dr. Av, or I need to speak to the Dean of Students, or Karyn, I need to speak to you about a matter that is purely confidential, and I don't want my son or daughter to know. I don't want my student to know. And then we're like, okay, can you tell us a little bit more about it? And they'll tell us. And sometimes we're talking about things that are really going on. It may be the health condition of a family member that is a serious health issue, and you do not want your student to be so anxious about that it could potentially affect their ability to focus and all of that. Or there may be things that are going on that are urgent. What we will often do is to talk with you about what is the appropriate moment for that engagement with the student. And sometimes we will facilitate that. Unfortunately, the things that happens are sometimes death of a member of a family or grandparent and so forth, things that really can have such bearing on a student. And we want to make sure that that is done appropriately, and that we are in partnership with you on how to best deliver that news. And so it would be maybe our community director that will find the right time when the student can be on the phone with you to have that conversation. But then when you finish that phone call, you know that student is getting supported by a member of our community and by someone who's an adult who can be there to provide the student the avenue that they need. But I think the piece that is important is that all too often, you may think that your student may not have a sense that there's something that's off, and a lot of times they do. And they'll come to us and say, I don't know what's going on, but I feel like there's something going on, and I feel like they're not telling me. And so it is important that we find those avenues of communication and to make sure that we're doing it in a way that doesn't create more anxiety and is the opposite of what we're intending to do. So that's an important one. And then the next one. Treat us like adults, but never forget that we'll always be your children. We love you and we miss you, even if we don't tell you very often. This is a big one for me, because college is really a transition. And, their first home will always be their first home, right? It will always be their first home. We will try to create a home for them here, and we will do everything we can to create that home, but they have their families that are back. And it's very important for them to not only recognize that, but for all of us to recognize that. And I often say this, is that students may not tell you how much they miss home, but they sure tell us. And we sure know through their behavioral indicators how they're missing home. We see these bumps along the way. We see, for example, the student who was really patient at the beginning, and all of a sudden, their roommates have become the worst thing for them. They're really hating everything about their experience at American University. They wish they had never come, et cetera, and so forth. We get that, and we know what that is. We know what that cycle is, and we can predict exactly when that cycle is going to be. And then, you may ask, okay, so do you want to come home then? And then they say, well, no, I don't want to come home yet. And what that is perfectly part of the transition. And they miss home. How can you not miss home? It's the place that gives you comfort. It's the familiar. And so coming into a new setting, there'll be a lot of those. But if we do our job right, and if we do our job well, as they actually adjust to American University, you may likely hear less and less from them. Whereas in the beginning, you are the only source of sort of, what I would say of stability for them. But as they develop their wings, as they begin to kind of find their place and their home at American, then they begin to have these other forms of relationship that are there. They can never substitute, nor that is the goal, to substitute for what they have with their families. But know that we hear that a lot. They will tell us how much they miss home. But they also don't want to tell you too often, because they're afraid that then that's going to make you anxious the more you hear about the fact that they're missing home. And then, Karyn, we're going to move to the next one. Again, it's a journey. And what is important about this picture is that the journey is never a straight path. It is not a straight path. If it was, then it wouldn't be college. If it was, then it wouldn't be, growing into adulthood. So knowing that it's not a straight path and that there'll be literally curves along the way, there'll be moments that are straight. As long as we can stick with the journey and we can stay on the journey, we're going to be all fine. And that's an important part to always remember. Next. So here's the thing. I've talked about the growth opportunities. I've talked about the adulthood. And I've talked about the fact that there's going to be bump along the way and that there are curves along the road. We call that literally what I call the red zone. Within the literature of student affairs, we know that students go through what we call the red zone. And what do we mean by the red zone? What it means by the red zone is that the first 6 weeks are going to be the most challenging for students. Talk about change. There is so much change, so much transition. All of their senses are heightened during those 6 weeks. And when they first get here is what we call the honeymoon period. And I think we all know what the honeymoon period is. Everything is great. I love what I'm seeing. I'm getting to connect with friends. I really think this is an incredible experience. This is why American University was my choice school. All of those things. The honeymoon period is truly a honeymoon. Everything is going great. Then they get their first major assignment. And your students, like all other students, these are go-getters. They've been good students for for the time that they've been in school. This is how they've made it to American University. They've learned how to do that well. And they've come and they've gotten their first assignment. And then, boom, it's like, wow, I got my first B. I've never gotten a B in school. What's going on? Or I've gotten a C. Oh my goodness, the sky has fallen. What's going to happen to me now? They begin to question every part of themselves. Am I good enough? Is this really what I needed to do? What happened here? And then you start seeing those pieces. Then what ends up happening is, in some cases, they may be in denial and they may decide, well, okay, that's happened, but I'm going to continue the course and do what I need to do. They're having these social connections that are going on. They, in some ways, are having some challenges with managing time. They're spending maybe too much time on socializing, not enough time on the classes. In other cases, they're spending so much time on classes because they don't know how to connect with their peers in some ways, etc. But they're going through that piece. And then we get into what we call midterms. And by the time midterm comes here, reality checks really sinks in. And it's like, oh my goodness, I only have X number of weeks to get this semester through. And then we start seeing number of students who are contacting saying, I don't know what to do about this. You know, I may have missed a number of classes. I may have done X, Y, and Z. How do I make up for those things? There's all of those things that are going on. And then there's the final. The first 6 weeks are the most challenging. And this is why we call it the red zone. And during those 6 weeks, you're going to see their emotions really go up and down, from really being happy to having some times when they're really on a downer. You're going to hear a lot of things about how they're trying to, in many ways, make time for the things that they have to. You will hear their struggles around time management, etc. So keep in mind the first 6 weeks are called the red zone. It is a normal part of college. What would become troublesome is if the student never gets out of those 6 weeks, right? Is if by the time that they got to the semester, they never really got themselves back up. That would be more troubling. But know that the red zone is a very big part of the college experience and one to expect, and one that we know, and we know exactly the timing of it. Everything from the roommate problems to the early warning from faculty to you name it. This is where we know the red zone is. And so we are there, and we will talk to them about the red zone. We'll talk to them about signs to keep in mind about the red zone. Those are things that will come up with the stressors that come in. Next. So this journey, or your student are not taking this journey alone. There are so many resources that they will have access to, and those resources, you'll hear more about them throughout orientation. Everything from the Dean of Students office, and that is the place where if faculty have concerns, if staff have concern about a student, they'll send what we call a care report. And then based on that care report, there's a team that comes together to figure out how do we problem solve and how do we engage the student in problem solving. There's the Academic Support and Access Center. We have so many resources there, and you've already heard from my colleague Jessica Waters and others about the range of support that we provide to students. We have our Counseling Center. You'll be hearing from them. There's the Center for Diversity and Inclusion, our Student Health Center. We know that the connection of the mental to the physical is one that we're very aware of. There's one office that I hope if your student never make it there, that would be perfectly fine, and it's the Student Conduct and Conflict Resolution Services. I often say if your student makes it to conduct, it means that they have broken some of our community norms, and or they've been folks who have been subjected to others who've broken some of our community norms. It's really important that we create a community where everyone can thrive and where everyone can have a sense of place. But if students are not going to abide by what are community norms and standards, then there are consequences to behavior, and it's through our student code of conduct. The code is not meant to be punitive, it is meant to be educational, but it's really important that students pay attention and that they understand that there's a shared responsibility for community. And then of course, Health and Promotion and Advocacy Center will be one that's doing a lot of outreach to students. But just my message to you all is lots and lots of resources that are here, from first year advising to financial aid. We have a lot of resources that are here for students, and you will be getting much more of those information throughout the orientation this summer, and you'll hear more about how to access those. And then Karyn, next one. So this is a big one for me. As we want this to be a partnership with families, and I cannot emphasize enough what this partnership means. It needs to be a partnership of trust. It needs to be a partnership of engagement. But part of that partnership of engagement also means that there are sometimes constraints to what we can share and how we can share that. So if you contacted me as a family member and you said, listen, I'm contacting you to see whether or not my student is going to class, I will not be able to answer that question. And the reason I wouldn't be able to answer that question is because we also really, it's important that we build relationship of trust with students, and that students do not feel like we're here to surveil and to surveil their lives. That becomes a very important one. So FERPA, which is the Family Educational Right and Privacy Act, really precludes us from sharing information about a student, for example, their grades and other key information without the student giving permission and giving a release. So as a family member, you will have to have conversation with your student, and your student will have to fill out an online form that gives you specific access, and it would have to say who it needs to give access to, what level of access it's going to give you, and for what type of information. Short of that, we will not be able to disclose to you by you calling us or you sending us an email about a case. Of course, if there's a health and safety and there's a health danger, of course, we'll be communicating with you and we'll be partnering with you. Another one is what we call proxy access. Students have the ability to give you a proxy access that allows you to see their bill, that allows you to see some information that is on their portal. And then again, you'll be able to access those. And then of course, there's HIPAA, which we all know. All of us who go to doctors and everything, it's important that we know that our information is kept private. The same way if we go to see a counselor, we want to make sure that that information is kept privately. And so there are constraints to those restrictions. But I think what you're hearing from me is have a conversation with your student about what you will need to have access to. They need to be comfortable with that and provide you access. The same way that they give you access, they can take away that access. Because sometimes I'll get a parent who will call me and say, I was able to see X, Y, and Z, and now I can't. What's going on? The system is down. And I'm like, no, the system is not down. Let me check, but the system is not down. Is that the student, the same way they can give you access, the same way they can take away that access. So that's just a conversation and a discussion that you all need to have around what will be needed and when it will be needed. And then next one. Safety, drugs. Here are some conversations you need to have with your student before they come. And we will continue to reiterate this. Safety. We have a stellar team here around safety pieces and around our protocols for safety. You'll be hearing from them. The pieces around drugs and alcohol are things that we really feel is important to have those conversations. We often hear, because they may be coming from states where marijuana is legal, even if marijuana is legal, there is an age here, and most of the students are not of that age. I keep reminding them. And in DC, we do have, marijuana is legal. It is not legal at all at the university. It is not. We do not permit that irrespective of what age. It's important to have those conversations. So talk to them about that. Talk to them about access to information. You will become well versed on the policies and procedures. And then also, talk to them about ways to seek help. One of the most common thing we hear, and whenever we post students, is what is the likelihood that you would ask for help if you had a situation? It is not surprising that that is rated very low. And it's great because in some ways students want to sort of, figure it out themselves. That's what it means to kind of grow up. That's great. But we don't want them to feel like in trying to figure it out, they're stuck in such a way that it becomes detrimental. It becomes detrimental to their education. It becomes detrimental to their health. It becomes detrimental to their sense of being. And so this help-seeking behavior needs to be re-engaged, and we need to continue those conversations with them as often and reinforce those messages that seeking help is not a sign of weakness. It's actually a sign of strength. And then Karyn, next one. So for consideration, lots and lots of you have questions about COVID-19. And lots of you have a lot of questions about what does this mean? And here's a couple of things that I can say to you. As someone who is co-chairing the Health and Safety Task Force for the university, and as someone who's been involved with the COVID-19 sort of leadership at the university around how we respond to that, there are lots and lots of measures that we're putting in place around COVID-19. Everything from what the health and safety guidelines and measures are going to be as it relates to the CDC, as it relates to the Department of Health, and how we make sure that people really understand those and are in many ways abiding by that becomes really important. To things having to do with increased cleaning, to things having to do with the importance of creating spaces where there's physical distancing, to things having to do with what would testing look like and who do we partner with for testing, to how do you do self-monitoring to make sure that we all have a shared responsibility in our health and care. All of those things are being put in place as we speak, to what our residential model is going to be that provide us with the health and safety measures that are needed. All of those are being put in place, as you can imagine. We're working in very close partnership with DC and with the consortium of universities that are in DC, and I'm part of that group that is looking at the planning not only for American, but looking at consortium of universities and how we plan together. We do not believe in reinventing the wheel when we don't have, but we also know that the other thing is there will be mandatory training for everybody. Everyone who's coming into our community needs to understand our community expectations and our community norms. So there will be mandatory training around COVID-19 health and safety measures, and that will be mandated for every single member of our community before we get started, and it will be reinforced throughout the process. And we'll be doing some monitoring also throughout. If someone finds themselves to be symptomatic, there is an immediate protocol on what we do with that. And if they are found to be COVID-19 positive, there's a protocol for how we initiate self-isolation, how we work with DC for contact tracing. Those pieces will be put in place, and then how we support students so that they can continue with their education and not have that disrupted. Those have already been mapped out in the ways that we need to. And so just want to reassure you that there's a robust plan in place. And this work is co-chaired by Dan Nichols, who's my colleague and who runs our risk management. And Dan used to be at the Capitol Hill, and they were responsible for safety of Congress people. And he was there when they had the anthrax scare. And so he understands very much what health and safety measures needs to be, and we take that very, very seriously. We're also not under the illusion that even with those health and safety precautions, people are going to be anxious. So part of that is how do we provide support and how do we provide that community of care, knowing that these are young people, and as young people who are coming into any environment, that there will be a need for thinking about well-being. There will be a need for thinking about how do we reinforce the message, and that we do not take actions that are punitive or actions that are about shaming, but it's really actions about education. How do we educate, and how do we make sure that we all continue to adopt behaviors that we know are going to be important for all of us as a community. So any other piece here? The community of care. I've talked a lot about the community of care, and I want to really concretely tell you, what does that look like? What does that look like on an everyday basis? The community of care is that, we have first-year advisors. We built a first-year advisor model where literally the advisor has no more than 79 students. That is the lowest ratio that you're going to see of advisor to students in a first year. But we were intentional because we know that first experience based on the red zone, based on what all the adjustments are, we want to make sure that there's a real touch point, and that touch point is a continuous touch point. That's one of the keys that we have from a community of care. Second community of care is that we have the residential life and housing. Within our residential life and housing, you're going to hear a lot more from that team about what do we have, what is the community of support that exists for students, and how do we make sure that community of support is as robust as possible for students. The third thing that we also have is that we have early warning reports. And that is that we ask faculty and other members of the community, if you see something, say something. Say in a way that protects the privacy of the student, but we need to be alerted to it. So if, for example, a student was coming to class and all of a sudden they've stopped coming to class and they have not communicated that they're ill or something, then the faculty will probably alert us to let us know, hey, there's something going on with the student. Then we immediately enact that community of care, and someone will be reaching out to figure out what's going on with that student. That's part of our important piece of see something, say something, so that we can provide the support in due time and not let the situation exacerbate and then it becomes too late. So that's another piece. The other piece is the care reports. We have a system that is called the care system. And what that does is it's through the Dean of Students office, and the Dean of Students will be telling you more about that. But what basically that means is that if a student is having, and if there's an issue that's going on with a student and a member of the community is concerned about them, they can initiate a report, and then someone from the Dean of Students office will follow up and will make sure that there's the follow-up with that student. That's one of the ways. Family members can do the same. You can, reach out to the Dean of Students office with a concern that you have about your student, and then the Dean of Students office will continue to engage that student in the problem solving. What the Dean of Student office is not going to do is to call you back after every communication they've had with the student to tell you what's going on. You are going to have to trust that then that the ball has been picked up from there and that they're engaging the student accordingly. And sometimes what we have found is students will resist, and sometimes what they need is 2 or 3 nudges for them to kind of begin to kind of see why it's important for them to react and to respond. That's the community of care and the guardrails that we have in place. But more than anything else, this is a partnership. We know that we don't do this work alone. We do this work in a team at the university, but we also know that in doing this work, we all want what is best for the students. So as family members and as a university, we want to see students who come, students who learn, students who grow, students who thrive at American University. We know that in that process, there'll be some bumps. We know that in that process, there'll be some difficult moments, as the red zone is. But at the end of the day, if we have a partnership that is a partnership of trust, then we know that we're going to be able to navigate those together. And that's pretty much my message to you all today. And with that, I'm going to take a couple of questions that have come in. I know there were lots of questions about COVID-19, but I want to take questions from what you all have written. And so Karyn is going to read some of those questions for me.
Sure. I think one of the questions that really stood out for me was one of our parents had asked if there are any things that we should not be doing as the parent of a first-year student.
Are there any things that they should not do as a parent of a first-year student?
Right. Like the what not to do guide.
Here's the what not to do as a first-year parent. I think one of the things that we want to do is we want to be there for our students, and sometimes in being there for our students, whether we recognize it or not, we enable behaviors that are not healthy behaviors for them. And sometimes you will have those conversations with us. Well, we'll say, we hear you. Let's figure out together how we might get there. And here's an example of what I mean. And I hear this sometimes, that you're in regular communication with your student, that's great. But sometimes we'll hear from parents of a first-year student that in being in regular communication with them, it also means that literally they are sending the student a reminder of when they need to get to class, a reminder of when they need to do their homework, a reminder of those different things. And let me say this, that may be how you and your student prefer to function, and that may be fine. And so I'm not going to tell you what to do and what not to do. But what I can tell you is, in doing that, the fact that you're not physically present, how do you know that they're actually doing those things? You may not. So I think it's better that we step back and that we actually have the conversation with the students about what are the safety nets that are available to them and how they begin to leverage those safety nets together. So I would rather that it be more about talking to the student about, it sounds like you may be having some challenges with time management, which could be very normal because when you were in high school, it was so structured. And now that you're in college, you have all this time and you're not sure what to do with that time. And perhaps what you need to do is go to the time management session that is offered through the Academic Support and Access Center. That would be the way I would turn that around to get to this piece of time management, because it is about lifelong skills that students need to learn. And college is that place where they still have the opportunity to learn that before they get out there into the work world. So that would be one example of something that I would say that I wouldn't do. The other thing that I often laugh about is, I think, and it's normal, as family members, as you think about college, and this is your first one, like 67%, this is your first student going to class, to school, university. One of the things that families do a lot is that they replicate what they knew in high school, right? And what do I mean by that? So in high school, you had the equivalent of the guidance counselor, and they tried to figure out who's that guidance counselor at the university. That might be the first-year advisor. But then they also figure out, well, if I have a problem, if I have an issue, I go to the principal. And who's the equivalent of the principal here? The equivalent of the principal is the president's office. Here's the thing, the president's office does not deal with day-to-day student issues. So if you send your email to the president's office, guess where it comes? It's gonna come to Karyn, it's gonna come to myself. That's where it comes. So to cut down on some of what I call those pieces, If you're in doubt or if there's an issue, go to the source where the authority lives to help you solve that problem. Do not necessarily assume that what was the way you function in high school is exactly the replicate at the university level. And that is why we're doing this seminar, so that you know the resources and you know your touch points for how to get things solved.
Great. There were a couple questions that came in about parent support groups, or is there a checklist for parents the same way there is for the incoming students? Where do they find calendar information? And the slide that we've got up there for you now has a number of resources for you. Most of those come out of my department. Our website is constantly being updated, and before the end of June, we're going to have some more information provided for you about like what to expect kind of month by month to get you like kind of your checklist. So watch for that. Stay tuned. We'll also make updates about the calendar. One of the best resources that I've got at my disposal is the parent Facebook group, and the official one that has this icon that you see on your screen, because that lets me send out really quickly the latest updates from across campus. And sometimes it's deadlines. Sometimes it's just things you might realize your student would find interesting. And so you can share it and kind of be that partner with us to nudge the right students to the right options on campus. You can also shoot us a message through that venue too, and our email address is on here. Fanta, there were a number of other questions around the COVID-19 and what to expect for the fall. And I realized this audience heard as much from us because they joined us as we were dealing with the aftermath in the spring. If something should flare up in the fall, what might families come to expect? Like, how should they think about this as they plan for the fall?
Great question. And what I would say is that if, let's say, something happened in the fall and there's a flare up, the way we start is we look at the directives and the guidelines from DC. We are in DC as the jurisdiction, so we look to our city to provide us with the guidelines for that. And actually, a fun fact about that, the mayor of DC is an AU alum. So someone who clearly knows AU quite well. And so we follow those directives that are coming out of DC as a first line. The second piece is we are writing and we have our protocols for health and safety. So it's one of those situations that if there's a flare up, what we will do is we communicate, and I do not believe that you can ever over communicate. We have mechanisms that are available for us to communicate quickly to students, and you're going to hear some of those mechanisms through our health and through our safety office. Is everything from the Rave Guardian, where students will basically be getting an alert from us as soon as something happens as a development, which means, for example, if we have something that's a big issue that came up in DC, we'll alert them immediately, because students will be in, the residence hall, the community directors and the residence hall assistants are all there to make sure that we have the exact protocols that need to work out. If for some reason students will need to be heading home for a reason or other, we will be directly in communication with the families in addition to being in communication with the parents. So I guess what I'm saying to you is any major news that is coming out, we're not just communicating it to students, we're reinforcing that message with parents. So that will be one of the ways that you'll know, and we'll communicate that in advance. The other thing that we do, and we do a lot of that, is that we also sometimes set up webinars, where I've come and done webinars with families around a range of things, so we can answer as many of your questions as possible. And also we'll have on the family website, we'll have some of the FAQs that will be available so that you have that information in real time as it comes up. So what you're hearing from me is communication first, reinforcement of communication, and then there'll be clear guidelines on what we'll ask you to do, as we're asking your students as well to do.
Great. Okay, as you might imagine, there's lots of questions coming in with very specific inquiries around fall move-in. What hack? Do they need to start purchasing PPE for their students now? Will they be in singles? What if they had signed up for a triple and now they want to be in a double? These kinds of things. Fanta, I suspect a lot of this is going to come out really soon, but can you describe more for parents when they should expect to hear and how they can find these answers? Because it's not our normal answers.
It's a great question. June 15th is when we will be talking specifically about the fall calendar and the fall activities, including the move-in, and all of those informations will be readily available June 15th. Also, as part of that process, right after that, with our housing office and our residence life office is a checklist of what people need and how they're going to need to kind of pack accordingly, and what all of that would involve would be part of those mechanisms. The other piece that will come up is I can assure you there will be no triples. That much I can tell you right off the bat. In addition, as I've said, with health and safety, we are going to take the most stringent precautionary measures around health and safety, probably even more standards that are even higher than what the DC, Department of Health, will ask for, and CDC. We take those health and safety measures very, very seriously, and we want to make sure that we're creating the conditions that are the right conditions for that. And all of that will be covered in the June 15th memo and the follow-up that would happen on June 16th and 17th. So checklists, you'll get those checklists of what's needed, what is our housing model, and how we're addressing health and safety. You'll be able to get that information. What is the move-in dates and how that would work? All of those logistical information will be forthcoming as we move forward, but June 15th is that date.
Right. We've got parents trying to make airline reservations and all kinds of logistics details. So they're ready and eager for this. So parents, we're going to make sure that we're sending this out to you in emails that you're going to get directly from us. We'll post those to the Facebook page for parents. We'll have it posted on our family website and on the COVID-19 resources. You can find this, and you can always also reach out to me and my team, and we'll get back to you with answers if they're not readily apparent. And let me say too, Fanta and I talk about the parent questions all the time. So we really do welcome you. Go ahead and send those questions. You're not burdening us. It's really helpful for us right now to be able to get a sense of what is it that parents most need and how do we make sure that we're communicating that to you in a timely fashion. So be patient, but it's coming and we'll get it out to you. Fanta, can we take a little bit of a step backwards though and talk just a minute about the difference in the information that we broadcast to everybody and the information that maybe is only going to students and parents won't see?
Yeah, I think that's important. There are things that certainly we would be sending to students and that parents will not necessarily see. Clearly, an example would be any communication that we're sending out to a specific student about a matter that pertains to that student, whether it's a matter having to do with their academic status or a matter that has to do with health and welfare that we want to catch up with them on. Those are going straight to the student, and it's not going to the parent, and it's going to the student official email address. And I'm going to keep repeating that. The official email address is where this is going to be going to. Those will not be going out to parents. The community communication that we send those to parents. Those major events, things that are going on. There may be things that are, invitations to activities and things that are going on that will not necessarily get to parent. But even with those, Karyn generally tends to post those on Facebook so that you're aware of it. And in being aware of it, you can nudge your students to kind of attend and to participate. So that's the way that would go about that. But I would say when it's official communication to a student that is specifically directed to the student, that will not go to the parent. That's the other reason why having proxy access to the portal will be helpful so that you can go to some of those sites that is on the portal and that you can work with your student. And as part of the parent communication through our Office of Admissions, there's a checklist that we've been doing with first-year students, but there's a parent checklist as well. Like things like immunization that we do with students, we know that parents are the ones who generally will get that information and they're more likely than their students to follow up on. Things like health insurance, when we go with the health insurance, those are things that we will be sending to students, but we know parents will probably be the ones who will be following up on that because that email is likely to be sitting there with the students. So there'll be those communications where there's a lot of redundancy as well. Yes.
Yep.
Karyn, anything else to think about around this piece?
Yeah, well, the waiver, some people have been asking about the health insurance waiver. We'll send out details about that later. We're finalizing it. We've had to make some adjustments because of the uncertainties for the fall, but we will communicate that with you. There's also some questions around financial aid, access to student services. And Fanta, I'll let you speak to heads up on that, but let me preview for the parents that all of the summer's orientation sessions that are for parent audiences are recorded and will be available on the orientation website. It takes a couple days for them to finish processing them. And you'll also find helpful links for all of our services on campus on that new parent family website. We tried to really dig into like, what's the direct link to get you right to where you can find the dimensions of your student's residence hall room and all those kinds of details. But Fanta, what else do you want people to know at this point about those services and accessing that information?
I think the key thing to remember is that on the financial aid side, any of your students who are packaged for financial aid in coming to AU, they have a designated financial aid counselor. So they should be reaching out to that financial aid counselor if they would like to revisit the packaging and all of that. That's where they should go. For any family members who are in a situation where their financial situation has changed since their time of their deposit, is initiating for the first time communication with the financial aid office. What you should do is email AFA, the financial aid office at american.edu, and then they'll route it to the counselor or to the associate director. That's where you should go. And if you're finding that you're getting lost and or you're not making that connection, then certainly let Karyn and others know so we can connect you to the right people for the financial aid. But there will also be a webinar with the financial aid office as part of our series. So stay tuned for that. Our financial aid associate director will be making a session along with AU Central, because we know that that's an important part of engagement.
Fanta, can you just confirm for me? It's my understanding that the first year advisors have already started to reach out to the incoming class, right?
That is correct. They're beginning that process. They were starting with early decisions, and then the rest of the students starting this week. So they will be reaching.
So how did the first year students get walked through the course registration for the fall?
So and there is a session specifically that we're also looking at the first year advisor and how you work through that. But with the first year advisor piece, what is happening is that the first year advisor will communicate. Students will be asked to take a series of steps that they need to do. They have to do, for example, their math competency exams. Then they will need to basically go and take a look at the schedule of classes and put in initially what are the classes that they would like to take. And then the first year advisors will be having consultation with them on actually finalizing the class schedule and then getting the registration done. So you should be, if you haven't heard yet, you will be hearing from your first year advisors around these processes. And again, all communication are through the official AU email. So students need to make sure they've activated that. They need to make sure that they're checking that on a regular basis, because there'll be a lot of communication that'll be coming up. And the parent checklist will also, the student checklist and the parent checklist will indicate when it's time for registration, when it's time for immunization, when it's time for health insurance waivers. We keep track of all of those checklists because we know that it's a lot to digest. So whenever you get that communication with the checklist, it tells you the timeline and the deadline by which those needs to be done.
Great. So as students are trying to work through which courses they might register for, is there any way that they might know whether a class would be offered online or in person, or how can they plan? Like, do we do studio classes, art classes, dance classes, those remotely if we need to? Like, what does that look like?
So yeah, in the first one, when they're doing their registration, they will not necessarily see that. As we're finalizing the fall plan, they'll see more of that, where there'll be a descriptor that is attached to the class. And then I think also even for the classes that are online, there are live sessions as well that are attached to those classes, small groups that are attached to those, and so forth. So there's going to be some descriptors that they'll be able to have, and then also the first year advisors will be able to help them know on the system what that looks like. But what we also believe that for the students, and this is one of the things we'll learn with the strength, is that a lot of our energy and a lot of our time are spent on the pedagogical part of the learning, right? It is really spending time on what do we know for effective learning? What do we know for students at this age developmentally and how they learn best? And faculty being able to do that work is where we're spending a lot of our energy as well. Whether it's face-to-face or online, how that gets done pedagogically and how you do that developmentally with 18, 19-year-olds is key.
Excellent, thank you. Well, there's plenty more questions coming, and we've got some staff who are helping to respond. Families, you're welcome to send more questions to us at auparent@american.edu. We're just about at our limit for today's session. Fanta, any closing words or advice?
Well, I mean, I think what I'm going to say is to say thank you. Thank you. We're excited. We're really looking forward to meeting our entering class. And also, we're very much looking forward to the partnership with families. It goes without saying, as Karyn and I often talk about, families are very much members of the AU community. And it's not only your student that's made a commitment, whether you recognize it or not. When your student made a commitment to AU, you, whether intentionally or not, have also made a commitment to being a partner with AU, and we look forward to that engagement throughout this year and the years to come. And I often say to parents, one of the things, the same way that I really enjoy seeing students when they first get here and seeing them to the finish line, and I had so many graduate this past May, I look forward to the same with the class that's coming in. For us, it's not just about getting students here, it's about getting them to the finish line and helping them become their better selves throughout the process that they're here, and we want to be able to do that with you. So I look forward to that opportunity, and I look forward to the fall semester.
I'd say to parents, this is your summer at home with your wee one, and it is a transition. Make sure they clean their room before they leave, because it'll sit empty for a couple months, and they should do that cleaning themselves. We don't do their laundry for them, so they should learn now. But also, you know, like, this is really the start of that whole new journey where you get to figure out how you want to engage with them as an adult in the world. I have a student who I just sent off for her first year at college, so I totally understand where you're at. It's an emotional thing. I'm going to get the tissues out, but it really is a whole new opportunity. And so take a moment to pause and reflect and celebrate your accomplishments of getting them to this point, and then really think intentionally about what you want this to look like moving forward. And you've got this.
Yeah, and the summer will go by so fast, you know, even in this summer, that's been a very challenging summer. Still know that it goes really fast. And so savor those moments, cherish those moments, and have the conversations that are needed during this time.
Thanks all.
Thank you to all of you. Thank you.